to another episode of Coaches on Zoom Drinking Coffee. It is great to be here with a new friend that I've met over the last month, Ernest Barbaric. Ernest, it's great to have you here, a fellow Canadian coach. You're in Calgary, I'm in Toronto. I've lived in Calgary before. It's great to have you on the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm really happy that we connected, and we're in Calgary for not too much longer. We're making a move out to Victoria, BC in July.
Well, and Victoria is another place that I've lived in my coaching journey. So it's one of the most beautiful places in the country for sure. Yeah.
You know, I've been there, I think it was almost 20 years ago, or just around 20 years ago. So I ride motorcycles. And so back then that was the first time I rode from Calgary to Victoria with a group of, there was 3 or 4 of us. And I remember seeing the ocean for the first time it was just incredible. And so it always stuck in the back of my mind, and we waited a long time to make this happen. Now it's here. Yeah,
that's cool. So what takes you to Victoria?
You know, we wanted to do that for more than a decade. So my wife and I, and now a daughter, we wanted to do it more than a decade, and stars just aligned when this COVID situation hit. Everything kind of flipped on a dime, and it seems that a lot of stars aligned to make this possible for us. So my wife ended up getting a job there very quickly. It was easy for me because I work from home. And the house, like so many different things have aligned that I have not had that kind of experience before in my life. And so we just decided to follow through with it.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's cool. And so fellow coaches, we just finished got 3 weeks with Rich Litvin and an intensive program that was pretty intense. And I really enjoyed your interactions through the program, and also in Rich's Facebook group. Seemed like a very curious guy that loves to dig into things and really understand things at a deep level. So how did you end up doing this for a living?
How did I end up doing this for a living? There's a bit of a story, and I want to hear yours as well.
Sure. Yeah.
But the one thing I was going to mention in regards to getting into that group or any kind of a program is that I tend to be an intense learner. I found that, after university, I've taken on different trainings, different programs, and different kinds of things. And I find that the older you get, the more responsibilities you have, the more it's your own money that gets invested in this, and there isn't a company that pays for it. I've been an entrepreneur for 15 years. The stakes are different. The commitment is different. And so I found that I've become a much more intense learner as I've gotten older. And I just want to suck up everything out of the experience as possible. So every nuance, every question, I would go back, I have 30 pages of notes. I would go back and watch the videos every evening and look at it. So I find that I'm much more invested. And the other part is this work is a calling, and I want to circle back to that. But before we get to that, I'm curious now, how did you approach it?
Yeah, so the program, it was interesting for me going through the program, and I guess for those watching that weren't part of it, it was 21 days with sort of segments of content, spread out over the 21 days. So maybe 2 to 4 hours of content on any particular day. In my context, it was interesting because I'm full on coaching mode right now. I have 92 university students that I'm supporting who are in master's degree programs that are all now would have been together in Kingston at Queen's University and are now in their homes taking this content through their computers. So we really had to adapt to that and make sure that they were being supported. So I was doing 21 days of intensive Rich Litvin while I was doing intensive for 92 students at the same time. So it was a lot, but it was actually, I welcomed the sessions because they were, when you're a coach, you give a lot of energy, right? You're supporting and giving energy. And in the intensive, I felt I was receiving so much support and energy from the other coaches, that it was a really welcome balance to sort of my day-to-day of what I was doing. So I wouldn't say that I've had the opportunity to go as deep on the content yet, but I've got all the links, I've got all the content, and that is the plan, because the programs I'm supporting right now will come to an end in the next little while. So I'm looking forward to having a little bit of a break to dive back in.
So your game plan is to, now that it's kind of over, is to, and when there's a bit of space in your schedule, to go back and rewatch it and take it kind of back in.
Yeah. Yeah. And what was cool is, as we went through the program, I was applying stuff in real, like probably half an hour after the session was done. I was diving into, 4 back-to-back coaching sessions, and was able to apply some of the things right away, and that's my style of learning. I'm a very experiential learner. So give me a little bit of context and then let me run away and play with it, and then come back for more was a perfect model for where I was at that time.
I think that's interesting, because that's the way. So even before that training started, I read so much stuff, watched a bunch of videos. I started implementing it in the way that I was doing things. I saw the results, and that's what essentially led me to that particular training. And the interesting thing is that what I hear from you, you're very similar to another friend of mine who's a coach, and he hears something for 5 minutes and he's off to the races and he's done. Like I've helped him with a couple of marketing questions, because I come from a marketing background, and he's just like, yeah, I'm good. And he just goes off and does the thing. And, he does things very quickly. Whereas I feel like what I've done is I've taken the time. I usually take time to process, intellectualize, and all this kind of stuff. And what I've noticed is that, and this is something that I've been teaching my strategy students, is the friction is where you get the experience and the knowledge and the wisdom. Just knowing things doesn't necessarily get you anywhere further. It's applying it, doing it, trying it, see what fits for you, and all of those kind of things. So I appreciate that about the way that you do things.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting, because I think Rich asked a question on the Facebook group of sort of what was your one takeaway lesson that you could teach other coaches, right? And there was certainly a lot of sort of high level sort of insight types things, but mine was actually very practical, which is, for a long time, I couldn't really process how you could take a bunch of strangers, put them in a virtual group together, and create, trust, connection, vulnerability, so that you could coach in a group setting and have people really pull from it something personal for themselves, which to me is sort of the heart of what coaching is. And I marveled at how his program, both in the large group and then the small group setting, was able to accomplish that. And I've already started pivoting my practice with the students, because in a lot of ways, coaching them individually through this kind of a vehicle, it keeps them isolated from all the other students. It doesn't actually help support them having the sort of social connection. So my biggest takeaway was a very practical one, is there are ways to create group programs that develop trust and develop vulnerability and really help people connect with one another, even through video. So I've already implemented that one.
Well, I'm interested to know if it's working as well. From my observations, what I see with those kind of programs, so I went through CTI and then like a bunch of other different things. And I find that when you go through a program like that, you're there intentionally for a reason. And so when you're there with intent for a reason, you already come pre-open, if you will. And then you're in a group of people that have similar interests, intentions, and it makes it a lot quicker to tune in and be vulnerable and, create a safe environment. But the one thing that is interesting about the process too is that there's like a context setting, expectation setting in the beginning, and then you go into a group which has a leader that kind of holds the container. And then after that, you might connect with some people individually and that kind of stuff afterwards. So have you noticed that translating from that world into your world now working with students, has that remained, or is there like an element that may not be, for example, quite as strong with intent and purpose?
No, it's interesting because I had the same questions, but the one thing I found is the students are all in, especially because I deal with master's degree programs, they all actually do come from a somewhat similar intent, right? They're furthering their qualifications because maybe they're feeling vulnerability in terms of the job market or in terms of the ability to advance. The one program I coach are people that have no business undergrad training, and it's a pre-MBA program. So they're all nervous because they don't really know business, and they're going to an intensive business training program. So, and they're all relatively at similar places in their lives. So the intent part actually has been easier. I think what's been challenging is they're younger and they're not all yet socially, comfortable being vulnerable with other people their age. Whereas a room full of coaches, typically because you've chosen coaching, you've kind of gone through a certain process of vulnerability and embraced that. But I would say, and I don't know who was in your small group, but in mine, I had, I've been coaching for 30 years. I had Elaine, who's been coaching a long time, very professional coach. And then we had some coaches who were like just out of corporate and they're just getting started on their journey. And so I wouldn't say we were all there with the same intent when the program started. We even talked about that at the end of the program, is that, for those that have been around for a while, we were kind of not sure what we were going to get from these small group sessions because we felt like we were the experienced ones. But it was very obvious quickly that there was so much learning and sort of opportunity to support one another. And I've seen the same with the students, is the trick with the students, and I'd say any group, is to gradually build up the vulnerability and the sharing and, their comfort level with putting stuff out to the rest of the group that they would normally just want to keep for a one-on-one conversation. And it's how do you gradually move towards that? So like we've built little games into doing the breakout rooms and one-on-one where we just ask fun questions, right? Get them to share something with somebody they don't know at all. And then we'll bring them back and we just kind of very gradually build up until, and even with Rich's program, bringing people up on camera, right? I don't know if you remember Joan when she was on talking about, her project in Saudi Arabia. She was scared to death about being in that environment, right? But in some ways, that allowed other people to feel comfortable that they could put their hand up and be the next one on camera. So there's a process for sure, but I've been surprised that what we experienced has translated really well into this environment.
Do you think, now that you bring that up, I'm interested in what your thoughts would be. Do you think that being in front of a camera provides you with a level of insulation that you wouldn't necessarily get in the same room? So for example, you went through CTI, right? Was it?
No.
So I mean, with any kind of a training that you might have gone through, there are in-person elements where you're in a group and you get taught and all that kind of stuff. And so even when you're being vulnerable and sharing those kind of things with the other people in the group, you can see them, you can feel them, and if I compare that to an experience that, for example, is through a camera and a screen, like right now, like, do you think there is a certain level of like insulation or protection by being behind a screen, or do you think we are able to be fully vulnerable and open even with that? Or maybe that'll change generationally. How do you look at it?
Yeah, so I think there's two questions there, because I think there is protection of being behind a camera. I don't know if you remember the exercise we did when we did like the 3-minute coaching session, right? you had no idea who was going to be in front of you, and you had 3 minutes. The coaches I talked to who had done that exercise live with Rich in the past said that it was way harder in person than it was on camera. The nerves were much more present because there was,
And you're in the same room, so you can feel someone else being nervous. So this gives you a little bit of protection. Interesting.
Yeah. But I didn't sense that it stopped people from being able to get to vulnerability. I mean, you know, my small group is like just a flood of vulnerability. We've already committed to staying, you know, meeting long after the program is done, because people shared stuff, and we saw people grow in 3 weeks from being very timid, quiet, reserved, to being this flower opening of personality about themselves that was incredible. Including, you know, Elaine and I and some of the coaches who've been around for a while, you know, talking about the fact that, I mean, Elaine and Alexis were both in this group, right? So 2 of the coaches that did brilliant sessions, or they taught the rest of us, to hear them talk about how they beat themselves up after their talks about what hadn't gone well, was amazing, right? And it was like, you're sitting there going, wow, like I was so inspired by what you did, and yet you're beating yourself up for a couple of days about a word that you missed or a connection you didn't make. And I just found that really actually, I felt that really empowering, that, you know, we all have these things that go on in our brains.
We definitely do. You know, So one of the things that I've connected with Rich and a few other people about this too, and it was interesting because, you know, I did a TEDx talk in 2017, and I've only watched it once or twice since then, because I realized that my collar was flipped up the entire time. There was big chunks of content that I missed, and so there's a definite this like kind of like, I don't know if it's self-judgment or whatever it is that plays into that. And even after I've done quite a bit of speaking as well, and even after, you know, some of those, even the ones that you think were just awesome, you're like, oh, I could have done that better. Or so there is that streak, that's consistency of that kind of criticism remains, which is interesting. And it's something that I have actively started working on with intent a lot more recently. That was a lot of words to say that. That's the thing that I'm focusing a lot of my attention on. Yeah,
no, but it's interesting because, I mean, you know, the question around can we have vulnerability through this vehicle? It's a really important question right now, because if you look at what's going on in terms of the decisions companies are making with remote work and all this change, there is going to need to be some kind of an adaptation to HR, how HR operates and how employees are supported, that is going to have to be very different. And, you know, it's where my mind is at right now is are there models like what we just went through that could work to allow employees to be part of a group, and whether or not they feel comfortable sharing what they're going through, that they learn from the experience of listening to others share what they're going through and having some coaching support around that there's a model there that I think could work really well for HR people to support employees, you know, wherever they are in the world. And it's going to be necessary, because I think that, you know, there's this idea that everybody's going to be fine working from home, doing their own thing, misses out on the fact that we're all social beings, and are going to need some way to connect with people and be vulnerable and be able to share with people. And, you know, where if I was the HR director or a leader of a company, you know, I could usually sense, and I'm sure you've had this experience, you could sense when your employees weren't quite right and when there was something going on, and you could support them. That's going to have to be much more intentional now.
So here's the way that I see things. I feel like what just happened with COVID has accelerated certain things. So certain things were on trend and they just got there faster. The other part that I see is it's almost like a pendulum that happens with things in business and et cetera, et cetera. So we've gone from isolated offices to open concept offices, from open concept offices to some kind of a mix. And then from you have to be in here every day because it can't possibly be done remotely to now everybody's doing everything remotely. It can't possibly come in. So I feel like what's happening is that there's a range, there's a spectrum that's expanded now with the way that things are, and to see even what's possible. So you see, for example, Twitter has made it that everybody can work from home, but Facebook essentially said that if you work from home and you happen to move to a city that has a lower cost of living, we'll adjust your wage.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a few kind of interesting and new things that are developing in that space. And the other thing that you mentioned that I thought was that I think is interesting is that there's an HR perspective to making sure that employees are well, but in my opinion and in my experience with the clients that I tend to work with, I find that it comes down to leadership and how they set things up, because essentially you're setting an example for other people to follow as a leader, and you're setting the context for the environment. And the context for the environment is easier to set and create when we're all together. But now that we're all separate, you have to still do that, but you have to do it in a different way. And I think that's where a lot of the learning and growth is happening. And so I am curious, what kind of leadership, what kind of leaders can adapt to those kind of qualities quicker, and what kind of leaders are going to have to go through some kind of retraining or perhaps even changing what they do, because they may not be able to function with having 30% of your team in remote, 60% of your team comes in, and some of the and whatever's left, 10% is flexible. So it's just an interesting world that we're going to be emerging out of. But here's the other thing that I think, as we swing towards this remote and I can work anything from anywhere, I think that what we're going to see after some period of time, the era of that is just going to go back into, I like to be around people. So whether that means going back to the office or whether that means going to flexible offices where there's employees from different companies, that's something that I think we'll see emerge. Yeah,
I agree. I think there's going to be, it will shift back, but it'll shift back to something different than what it was. So it'll be fun I think we're in a good place as coaches to be able to support a lot of that, because we have the skill of being able to kind of support people where they're at and wherever that might be. And in a workplace where some people are going to be able to handle this really well, and some people are going to be feeling a lot of loss from being away from that environment. It is different kind of leadership, right? It's, I use the analogy, it's like snorkeling, in Hawaii. You're going to spend a lot of time on the surface looking down at what's going on down there. And every once in a while, you're going to have to dive down and help somebody. But it's how you do that in a way that is supportive, not sort of micromanaging. How are you going to empower people to do their work the way they need to do it versus the way it's been done in the office environment? It's gonna be fascinating to watch how this all changes the whole work environment.
I find it curious. I mean, you've probably seen the report that there are a number of companies that have installed screenshotting software and monitor their employees and all those kind of things, and the kind of context that the kind of precedent that sets, and if you combine that with automation and AI and a number of other things that are growing and happening in the business environment, there are some interesting challenges ahead. But I also believe that, and my hope is during COVID and after COVID, that there will be a class era of leaders that are working hard to make things better, rather than micromanagement through screenshotting and all that kind of stuff, to say that here's what we're trying to build, who's in. And I'm very aware of the fact that in a larger stalwart organization that becomes a lot harder, but those are the kind of skills and qualities, I think, of leaders that we need. And those are the kind of skills and qualities that top talent will be attracted to. That's the way that I see things. So it's almost, we're shifting from this reaction phase into creation phase of something that's better on the other side, rather than trying to drag ourselves back into the way that things used to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope you're right. I guess time
Me
will
too.
tell. Yeah.
So we put a pin in the conversation about how we ended up in coaching, and I haven't had a chance to hear your story. So it sounds like you've done a lot of sports coaching before, and so what was your journey to here?
Yeah. I came out of university, was expecting to go into business. We had a family business selling sailboats and equipment. It was sort of part of my lifestyle growing up. And I was a swimmer as well as an athlete. My folks decided to sell the business. And so I had to have a plan B. And plan B, I had been dabbling with, which was coaching on the team that I was an athlete on. And I really enjoyed it. I loved just the feeling of being able to help other people, see them improve, see the sort of light go shine on in their eyes when they kind of had a breakthrough. And I had some really great coaches as a young person growing up who had really inspired me, because I was a pretty average physical specimen. But I was able to do pretty well in sports, mainly because the coaches I had didn't ever tell me I couldn't, and they were always super supportive, treated me the same as they treated the most elite athlete on the team. So all of that kind of conspired to say, well, why don't I try this? And it's one of those stories where I tried it, and then 20 years later I realized I've been doing this for a long time. So I went through the sports system. I was a national swimming coach. I traveled the world. Got a chance to work with some amazing coaches and athletes along the way, and then went through a bit of a transition into leadership and ran the national coaching program for swimming, redeveloped the whole curriculum. So I redesigned a competency-based training program. Took about 7 years to get that from start to finish, and then I went to a conference, and for anybody that's watched previous episodes, I tell this story all the time, but I went to a conference in New York City where they had top sports performance people talking on panels alongside top performance people from other industries. So from the arts and from business and from medicine. And that conference, I just remember sitting in the audience, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks that what I had been doing for 20 years had nothing really to do with athletes. It had to do with human performance. And whether it was the lady from the Juilliard School of Dance, or the neurosurgeon who's got a team around him doing brain surgery, we're all doing the same basic thing. We're all attracting people with a certain talent, nurturing their skills, putting them in positions to be successful, and leading and nurturing that relationship. And so it was just sort of a light bulb went on at that 2-day conference that, well, I could do this, what I've been doing for 20 years, but do it with some new people. And sports, I've just started recently expressing this because it maybe has taken a while to process, but that's showing up as a sports coach in some ways felt like I always had to put on a bit of a uniform myself to be the sports coach guy, and to be sort of the personality and the ego and everything that goes with what I thought defined a sports coach. And, transitioning out of that, that's been one of the tricky parts, is to actually take that uniform off and realize that actually the guy behind that is different than the guy who was presenting himself for 20 years. And so that's been a really interesting journey to kind of get to know myself again a little bit. And it's really cool because at the same time I've been doing that, I've started working in these university settings where a lot of the students are in this phase of their life where, it's, what does society expect me to do? What do my parents expect me to do? Who do I need to show up as to be successful? And I suppose the wisdom that I can bring to them now is, the best route is to actually show up just as yourself and put yourself out there to the world and attract those people that are attracted to that person. And, so it's been a process for me to get to there. I'm a curious coach. I'm constantly learning, constantly seeking out information from other people, because I feel in some ways like this is a whole new journey for me, even though, people look at my resume and say, wow, you've been coaching for 30 years. A lot of ways it feels like I'm starting a new journey of coaching. So it's very cool. Yeah.
It feels in a similar way to me as well. Well, neat. That's a really, that's a interesting story, and it sounds like there's a long background to what you do, and as what's the right word? As like, it sounds like this like really big, tremendous transition to you, but to everybody else is like, yeah, of course you can do that.
Right.
And so, and it's all in here that that makes the biggest difference.
The 6 inches.
I've been doing a lot of research into mindset. So I started writing a book, and that's my pet project, is to expand more on that, because I found the similar thing. It's really, for me, it comes from entrepreneurship, but really it's how you see things, it's how you process things, how you react, how you recover, and all of those mindset things that basically essentially determine the kind of outcome that you're able to create.
Yeah.
That's neat.
Yeah. So I want to hear that's your backstory now. So, because we heard TED Talk, we've heard, I know you've done podcasts for a long time. You're writing a book now.
Yeah. Like there are a lot of different threads. So my journey to here has not been quite as clear and linear, I guess. So I've been an entrepreneur for 15 years. I've been in digital marketing, digital strategy space. I've helped organizations with digital transformation. I created the first digital marketing and social media certificate program in Western Canada for Mount Royal University. I taught at University of Calgary, and I still teach at the Canadian Marketing Association. So there's all of those kind of things. I've spoken at conferences. I've built a conference. Like, I've done a lot of stuff. But the root of what led me to coaching work happened in 2013. So I'm trying to kind of calibrate how much I want to go into all the things. But the short version is that my mom passed away in 2012 from lung cancer. It was an 8-month battle, and it happened really quickly. We were very close. Like, I'm an import. I come from Croatia. I lived through war. There's a whole bunch of stuff behind all of that. But what happened a few months later is that I came across an article by Sir Ray Avery on TechCrunch, and it was in September of 2012 that I remember reading it, and it talked about how he has 30,000 days of life to live in total, and based on that, he would prioritize different things. And that really resonated with me, especially after the loss and just a tremendous amount of grief that I was going through. And then I did a basic calculation based on my family history, how many days I have left. And so I came through this really rough and inaccurate calculation. I found out that I calculated that I had 26,000 days of life in total. And at that point in time, I had 13,000 something left. And then I was thinking, I've had this business. I worked in companies. I've had like a work background in corporate and as an entrepreneur. And what am I doing? That was the question that came out. What am I doing with my time here? And then after the loss of my mom, who was very compassionate, she was just an amazing person, caring. She helped so many other people. She's well remembered by a lot of people too. And so then I thought about, what am I doing with my time? And so I started looking into what is work that's meaningful. And I wanted to do something with my time that was meaningful, at the time I was thinking about what kind of legacy can I leave, all of those kind of things. And so that led me to start a podcast where I would interview interesting people that I thought were doing meaningful things, and then just try to learn as much from them. It was a guise for it was a disguise for me learning this for myself.
Yeah.
And so that's what, and I did that for a few years while still running my business and all these other kind of things. And at one point in time, I think I was at 130 interviews with executive leaders, authors. Like I would get people from, I would get New York Times best-selling authors on this podcast. This is before podcasting exploded.
Mm-hmm.
And it was amazing. And so I would collect all these things and I would share them. And then I started getting messages and calls from people that listened to the podcast and they found something that was insightful for them, or they changed careers or started a bit, like it had an impact on them. And then I had a few meetings with some of the people that were listening to the podcast, and they would essentially ask me for support, which I didn't feel competent to give them. So I could give them advice in the sense that, this person said this, and here's the way I see this, and I read this book, and da-da-da. Very much like consulting, which is what I've done for 15 years, but that wasn't the right thing. And so my wife actually went through coach training 2 years before I did. And she's like, well, you might consider this. And so I resisted it for a long time. And eventually I decided to do the entire CTI program. And I remember when we went through the foundations course, it's 3 days where they kind of like throw everything at you. You do all of the things. And I remember thinking like, this is it. This is what I've been waiting for this whole time. And through the process, you also have to coach someone along the way. And so while I was doing that, it just felt incredible. I felt like I was helping people. And so when all of that happened, it kind of opened up this part of me that I've been waiting to be opened up for years. For years before that, I was in this like perpetual state of existential crisis, trying to figure out like, what am I here for? What am I doing? How do I help? Where's my contribution? What's the legacy? Who am I? All of those things. And then it started being clearer through the process of training. And then for 2 to 2.5 years after training, I was still take on marketing contracts and speaking contracts and all those kind of things, because I was kind of trying to, I didn't know if I could make it work. And then things slowly started shifting. And then, and then it just kind of, there was a period of time when it just clicked. And so that's been that period. And I think I just needed that experience. I needed the reps. I needed the what's the right word? I want to say justification, but I needed the feedback from the clients that I was working with to say that this helped me do that. I need to hear that enough times for me to believe it. And that's what led me to here.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, look, this feels like part one of like a multi-episode series of conversations we need to have. So I do want to be respectful of your time. So why don't we call this first conversation to a close at this moment? But I'm certainly really, really interested in continuing the conversation about so much more and to get to know each other even at a deeper level. So thanks for coming on today, Ernest. It's been great to connect and have this conversation, but I look forward to future ones as well.
That sounds really great. Do you want to do a one word close?
Absolutely.
Okay. What's your word?
My word for today would be it's an overused word, but it's the word that feels most present for me today, which is authenticity. It's the place that I feel like I finally found in the last year or two.
And we'll definitely have to have another conversation, because I'd love to hear more about that. Mm-hmm. The word that's coming up for me right now is intrigue. Mm. Yeah, that for some reason that was the first one that resonated.
Very cool. With that, have a great day. We'll talk soon.
That sounds really great. Thanks, Andy.
Take care.